Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Hildebrandt with the North Carolina NEVI program. We're going to give everyone just a minute or two to join before we get started, just to make sure there's not any scragglers that want to be participating in today's webinar. So just hold tight. While you're waiting, you will see on this introductory screen a link to menti.com. As we wait for everyone to join, I encourage you to go to www.menti.com and type in the code 8265-3153, as we will be having an activity later on in the presentation to kind of get your feedback as we move forward. But again, we will be waiting about another minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, this is Heather Hildebrandt with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. It is my pleasure today to talk to you about community engagement for the North Carolina NEVI program. On your screen currently, you will see a link to a Mentimeter that we'll be using later on in the presentation. If you could take an opportunity to either on your phone or in another browser on your computer, type in www.menti.com and then type in the number for the survey, which is 8265-3153. We'll also be sharing this later on in the presentation. So if you don't catch it right now, you'll have an opportunity as we get closer to doing the actual surveying information. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar. It will be published afterwards on NCDOT's YouTube channel. We will also provide the link to everyone who registered for the presentation, so you have access to the information afterwards. Also, we will be doing a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please at any time enter them into the chat pod or the question pod, and we will be addressing those as we get towards the end of the presentation. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So today's agenda is kind of giving you an overview. Hopefully a lot of you have been involved and engaged in the NEVI program since we started it, but we want to make sure that we level set for any new participants in today's call. So talking about EV charging, what an EV is, kind of a brief overview, then kind of delving in a little bit deeper into North Carolina's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI program, where we are in that process, and then kind of segueing into community charging and trying to get your feedback on what you envision for your areas needing to support electrification. Next steps are just basically where we are moving into the next process. And then we'll also be doing some information about the Office of Civil Rights and what support they can provide to you. And then we'll wrap up the presentation with some question and answer. Next slide, please. So who are we? So again, my name is Heather Hildebrandt. I'm with NCDOT. Along with Paula Hemmer, we are the core NEVI group. We're the ones who are helping develop RFP, reviewing the applications, providing resources to all of the people within North Carolina on the NEVI program. Additionally, Tanya Smith is also here with us. She's also with NCDOT, and she helps lead the Office of Civil Rights, and will be providing support in that capacity. And then wrapping up the core team is Justin Robbins, who is the lead for HDR and supporting our rollout of the NEVI program. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Paula, who will be giving us a brief overview on EVs and EV charging. Paula?
Hi, everybody. This is Paula Hemmer, as Heather said, and We can go on to the next slide. I'll give you some basics about the EV charging. First, we have the electric vehicle overview. And there are many different passenger vehicles that have been promoted over the years, including natural gas and biodiesel. However, only one has really gained significant market share, and that is electric vehicles. There are three main types of these electric vehicles. The first is the gasoline electric hybrid, Toyota Prius being a classic example. It has a gasoline combustion engine in conjunction with a battery and electric motor. The electric motor assists the gas engine to decrease gasoline use and emissions, and the electric motor is charged through regenerative braking and any extra energy put out by the gas engine. The second type of vehicle is a plug-in hybrid, which is essentially a hybrid with a larger battery to power a larger electric motor, but also requires to be charged via an electric outlet, since regenerative braking cannot fully recharge the battery. The last one is the fully electric battery with a large battery powered motor and no gasoline engine. Classic examples are the Nissan Leaf or a Tesla. The driving range of newer vehicles rivals gas engines at plus 300 miles per charge. This presentation addressed charging infrastructure for total battery electric vehicles only. Next slide. These are the levels of EV charging. There are three levels generally discussed, and it is okay if you do not understand all of the terms that I will be using. It is there to give you a feel for the difference in the charging systems. Level 1 charging uses a standard plug, 120 volt plug with an alternating current like you would find in your bedroom. It takes a long time to charge, 2 to 3 days, to fully recharge a typical EV manufactured in 2024 with a battery sized for a driving range of around 250 miles. Level 2 charging is what we often see at government buildings, retail parking lots, along city streets. These chargers are 200 volt and 7 kilowatts of alternating current power, about the size of a dryer outlet. A typical 2024 model EV with a 250 mile range can recharge overnight with a level 2 charger. They generally do not put a strain on the local electricity distribution system if they are deployed in small numbers. Level 3 charging is generally called DC fast charging because it uses direct current, not alternating current, in order to transfer large amounts of power directly into a battery. DC fast chargers can range from 50 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts of power with varying voltages. A typical 2024 model EV can recharge in about 30 minutes using a DC fast charger. Adding multiple DC fast chargers to a site may require upgrades to the existing electric distribution system. Electricity costs can be significant for these high power systems. North Carolina already has a network of both level 2 and DC fast chargers, which we will discuss later in the presentation. Next slide, please. These are some examples of level 2 chargers and what they look like and how they might be deployed in your community. Developing the use case for these charging sites is key to siting and designing a good level 2 station. Do we expect customers to top off their charge to allow an extension in the driving range while they visit a store? Do we expect residential or business EV charging overnight? Are we going to charge customers for the electricity or give it away? Next slide. Here are typical DC fast charging systems, which are physically larger than the level 2. Newer systems are often modular to allow for the build out of chargers over time without significant changes to the infrastructure. Some of the photos show large cabinets which house these modules behind the chargers. The use case for fast chargers is also important. They are generally deployed to fully recharge a paying customer's vehicle in 20 to 30 minutes. They are often deployed in large numbers at one site, sometimes 8 to 20 chargers. Next slide, please. What is NEVI? NEVI is a term for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. This program was authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law passed in 2021. It sets out funding and specific requirements in the law for the design, construction, and operation of EV charging stations across the United States. Increasing the number of these charging stations that are available to the public will remove what we call range anxiety as a barrier to EV adoption. Range anxiety is an anxiety that you will not make it to your destination on the current charge that you have in your battery. The funds are given out as a competitive reimbursement grant and requires 20% of the project costs to be provided by non-federal funds, meaning that either a state or a local government or a business must put up 20% match of the project cost. Heather Hildebrandt is now going to discuss the NEVI program in a little more detail.
Thanks, Paula. Next slide, please. So what is it about? Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Didn't realize there's animation. One more, Faith, please. Another one.
More.
There we go. I think we're good. So the basically NEVI again is a federal program. It sets out $5 billion in formula funding that go to the state. North Carolina will be receiving $109 million in NEVI funding to build out the alternative fuel corridors within North Carolina. Next slide, please. The NEVI program is based on another federal program that predated NEVI, which is the Alternative Fuel Corridor Program. What you see here on the slide are the nation's either EV ready or EV pending corridors. The funding for NEVI is to be spent along all of the state's alternative fuel corridors to the NEVI standard before any additional funds can be expended. It focuses in on those interstates or large U.S. routes that connect the entire nation. And the alternative fuel corridor program in general focuses on any alternative fuel. So while the focus on NEVI is obviously electrification, we can also look at things like natural gas or propane. Next slide. So what is our approach? So we were receiving the $109 million in formula funding, and it has to be focused in on the alternative fuel corridors, which we're identifying as phase one. So we have to fully build out phase one before we can focus in on phase two, which is to build out either additional DC fast chargers off of those alternative fuel corridors, or to put in level 2 or lower level DC fast chargers at the community level. We recognize, however, that phase 2 engagement is going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of time talking to everybody about what they need for their areas to meet the electrification need. And that's the purpose of this conversation today, is to begin that discussion as we start planning for phase 2. Next slide. So what are the goals of the North Carolina NEVI plan? We obviously have the requirements that are on the federal side, which is building out this alternative fuel corridor to the NEVI standard. But we also want to make sure that it is an accessible, that EV charging is accessible to everyone throughout the state, that we also create reliability in case of emergency events. North Carolina, as I'm sure you're all aware, are subject to issues on the eastern coast as we have weather events, hurricanes, things of that nature. We need to make sure that we're able to get interior so that our community, our residents are safe. And we also want to develop our workforce and create opportunities equitably across the state. Next slide. So what are the requirements? I talked about that we have to build to this NEVI standard. So basically the main points are, I highlighted on this graphic here, but they have to be DC fast chargers. They have to be capable of simultaneously charging 4 vehicles at 150 kilowatts. Again, talking to what Paula said earlier, that means that you'll be able to fully charge your vehicle in 20 to 30 minutes if it was fully depleted. It requires a 20% non-federal match. That match has to come from private investment. The chargers cannot be more than 1 mile off of the alternate fuel corridor and no more than 50 miles apart. And they also have to be in operation for at least 5 years with a 97% uptime. Next slide. Kind of related to this, to the NEVI program, is another program that was funded under the same umbrella, trying to incentivize electrification of the transportation sector. And this is the charging, one of the other programs is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program. So with the NEVI program, each state received a direct allocation. The CFI is a discretionary grant program. So you have to apply, you have to, look to see, to whether you want to do on the corridor or the community-based. It can be, again, community-based charging, or it can be additionally build out of the alternative fuel corridor. We, in North Carolina, were successful in getting both a corridor grant awarded as well as one under the community base. And round 2 is open. So if you have interest in the program and have an idea of what you would like to do for your community, certainly reach out to Paula or myself, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paula and talk about where we currently are. Paula.
Thanks, Heather. This is a slide showing kind of our schedule and what we've accomplished. North Carolina began designing its grant program in January of 2023, and we had about 4 in-person outreach sessions as well as several online sessions to discuss rollout of phase 1. We engaged the public as well as industry experts likely to participate in the grant program on some level. In the spring of 2023, we issued a request for information from key EV charging station stakeholders to answer specific questions regarding charging stations. We also provided networking opportunities to facilitate developing teams to bid on the grant funding. The RFP was issued in spring of 2024, and we are now, it closed on in June, and we are now reviewing round 1 applications, and we will hopefully award funding later in the summer. In addition, we are kicking off phase 2 of the NEVI program, which funds community charging stations, as Heather was discussing. This is our first outreach webinar, which we will hope focus our efforts to design a good community charging grant program. We anticipate other in-person and online events after this one. Next slide. As we mentioned earlier, we released the NEVI Round 1 request for proposals in the spring, and this included 11 locations along major travel corridors that North Carolina DOT identified as priority areas to construct charging stations under the program. This was a smaller scale funding round to get a feel for what we can expect from applications to the grant program. This included areas where a single charger can serve 2 corridors and to address large gaps between charging stations with these 11 sites. As we said, the awards are expected to be announced at the end of the summer, and the selection process evaluates projects not just on cost, but on how the proposal meets the NEVI requirements and our goals for the program. So it's based on best value, not just on cost. Next slide, please. This is a map showing the orange areas are where we did receive proposals for building a charging station. So these are the 11 sites, and there are about 36 in total. Next slide. The North Carolina DOT will be issuing a plan update. Back in, I believe, 2022, we issued our first North Carolina electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan. It's required by the federal government in order to access funding, and each year this plan is updated. Our next plan is scheduled for release in September of this year, and it will be posted on our website after we receive approval from the federal government. Next slide. Now we will go on to discuss community charging, and I'm going to give it over to Justin Robbins from HDR to discuss this all with you.
Paula, hi everybody. Again, Justin Robbins with HDR. So there's a few slides that I want to run through, and part of the objective for this is really to set the stage for the questions that we're going to be asking as part of our Mentimeter activity. So I want to give everybody a snapshot of where we're seeing EV chargers within North Carolina right now, both level 2 and DCFC. So we've got a few dot maps that show we have kind of an understanding of the growth of EV chargers. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of implementation that we're seeing with EV chargers as well. So Faith, if you want to hit the next slide. So what's been happening, I think what's really interesting about this is that the growth of charging, and when we say port, what a port is the ability to charge a vehicle. It's different than a cable, but it's essentially what people refer to when they say a charger or a plug. So you can see the growth of EV ports throughout the time frame from 2010 all the way out to 2024. 2024, obviously that number is lower, but that's because the year is not yet over. So we would anticipate that number to be even higher than it is in 2023. And this really matches the growth in EVs that we're seeing both in North Carolina and across the country. So within 2023, we saw the installation of almost 800 level 2 ports and the installation of almost 300 DCFC ports. Now, those DCFC ports can come in a number of different sizes. Some of them are the types that you would see generally within a car dealership. Those are about 50 to 100 kilowatts. And then you get some of them that are almost like they're analogous to a fueling station, sometimes up to 350 kilowatts. So they're pretty fast, and they take a significant amount of infrastructure, and they cost a heck of a lot of money. So you guys are growing basically at the same rate in terms of both those charging types. So when we talk about the location of those chargers, level 2 ports, you can see the way that these are generally implemented are going to be coordinated alongside parking lots, right? These are areas where a car is overlaid from anywhere from 2 to 8 hours to being at home. And now these are showing publicly accessible level 2 ports. But you can see that there's a spattering all across the state with high concentrations around Charlotte, Raleigh, in the Winston-Salem area, and Asheville as well. Again, what you got to know is these are the types of chargers that you would see coordinated with the parking lot. This is not the type of charger that you would want to rely upon if you're looking at long distance travel. So if I'm traveling from Asheville all the way out to Wilmington, this map isn't going to be a heck of a lot of good unless I'm staying somewhere kind of on the way, or unless I can make it all the way to Wilmington and then use one of those chargers. Where it gets interesting is when you look at the location of DCFC ports, and that's the next map. And so again, these are analogous to fueling stations, high power pieces of infrastructure that are able to dump a lot of power into a battery in a very short amount of time. So when you look at the distribution of chargers around the state, obviously there's large concentrations along your urbanized areas. And really what the NEVI program is intended to do is to be able to continue the build out of charging infrastructure that meet a certain threshold of power, a certain threshold of reliability, and a certain threshold of spacing and proximity to those corridors all around your state. Some of those are already there, not in terms of NEVI, but chargers that kind of fill that gap. And you can see where there's a lot along your major corridors and your urbanized areas, but we're going to continue. The NEVI program is going to continue to kind of build out a holistic network along that AFC map that you all saw before. Now, this is all in service of talking about phase 2 and how we want to look at phase 2. And so we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask. Before we do that, we'll hit the next slide, which is the different types of implementation for these different charging types. So we've come up with this idea of what we're calling the charger transect. And so these are the types of implementations that I want everybody to think about when we start to consider where we can start to incorporate chargers. So we took it all the way on the edge on the left-hand side, what we call amenity charging. And that's where, you know, it's an area, maybe a library or public school or private entity that wants to put in chargers. They don't require a lot of upgrade, you know, anywhere from 2 ports up to 4, maybe 6 ports, but they can use the building's existing panel and the capacity that they have. And it doesn't require a heck of a lot of money to do it either. I mean, they're still expensive, but they are the cheapest of the options that we see on screen right now. anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 a port, and that can go up depending on the situation. Then we have other ideas that are becoming a little more popular, such as curbside or pole-mounted charging. That's where the charger is actually mounted on an existing telephone pole, and it's able to drop down a cord or a cable and plug into the vehicle. Obviously, you have to have parking nearby, you have to have a pole, you have to have coordination with the utility, but these are fairly straightforward and they're fairly cost competitive to build because there's no underground conduit, there's no tapping of existing power. Essentially, you can tap into that CAN transformer on the pole, and it's out of the reach for things like vandals, and the cables themselves actually coil back into the charger, which is helpful. When we get into more urbanized areas, then curbside charging is something that we consider, right? So if you're in multifamily housing, it could be difficult to have access to charging infrastructure. If you're in a city, for example, this is the type of thing that businesses or even multifamily housing that has access to curbside space, they can actually tunnel underground the sidewalk. They get access to the building's basement, the panel, and they're able to put in charging infrastructure there. It doesn't have to be urbanized like you see there. That can be more of a rural type or suburban type curbside charging application. It doesn't have to be a ton either. It can be almost an amenity that is added. And then we get to the more robust, which is what we're calling a charging hub. Now, the application for something like this, and this is really where you would see a more robust implementation of level 2, right? So that's anything over probably 4 to 6 ports. And that's when you're looking at an upgrade in terms of transform and potentially of service. And so you can apply these into places such as multifamily residential, office developments, commercial developments, public uses, quasi-public uses. They can even incorporate DCFC, although that's generally not the function of those, but it can be. Again, you do have, I like to say in electrification, there's not really economies of scale. So once you reach certain thresholds, basically the upgrades that you have kind of continue up the chain. So you have to potentially upgrade the surface if that's needed, if it's large enough. And so this is the kind of thing, again, if you're looking at a large scale electrification of your transportation system, we would anticipate to see a lot of these. But these are really, everything that you're seeing on the screen is incorporated into parking. It's where the vehicle is overlaid for anywhere from 2 hours on up. And they have enough time to actually charge. These are generally around 7 kilowatts, which, like Paula and Heather said, can take anywhere from 5 to 10 to 12 hours to charge a vehicle, depending on what its charge is when it rolls in. So if you want to hit the second slide, this is the other piece of the charging puzzle, and that's our level 3/DCFC. Again, analogous to a fueling station. This is where large quantities of power are brought into a site and they're able to keep vehicles traveling to facilitate long distance travel. And like Paula mentioned, they're more expensive to use, they're more expensive to build, but they're a really key component of building a holistic network that allows people to travel and to move and to access different parts of your state. And so this is one thing that as we start to think about the charging outside of those corridors, that map that was shown earlier, how do we think about that? What are the types of applications that benefit your communities? What are the types of charging infrastructure that you think can help both communities access those chargers, that can help people accessing those communities? Because ultimately we don't want to have any areas within the state that is inaccessible to people that are driving EVs, right? It's a component of equity, it's a component of tourism, it's a component of access. It's all these things that as we try and build a holistic network, we really have to keep in mind. And so as we move into this question phase on the Mentimeter, these are the types of things that I want you to keep in mind. And there's different ways that these chargers can serve different needs too. Keep in mind the objective. Is the objective equity? Is the objective hurricane evacuation? Is the objective whatever you think would benefit your community? Because we can start to look at the development of chargers and then the way that these are actually applied and try and develop a program in a way that, again, benefits North Carolina's communities to the fullest extent. So with that, I'm going to pause on the slides and I will ask to go to the next, which is the Mentimeter. So, as I mentioned before, phase 2, as Paula and Heather mentioned before, phase 1 is building out the corridors. Again, 150 kilowatts by 4. They have to be spaced no more than 50 miles apart on those corridors. They can't be any more than a 1-mile drive distance from those corridors. But once that's built out, we can start to get really creative about the types of charging and the location of charging throughout the state. And that's the type of feedback that we want for phase 2. So if you want to hit the next slide, we can talk about Mentimeter. I believe. I think Faith has to get it ready, so there we go. Like I mentioned before, or like was mentioned before, menti.com, and then the code is 826 8265-3153. And I think that's located in all the slides that we have as well. So you can dial it at any time, and essentially it'll let you, if you're dialing in late, you can always join the feedback. Menti.com, the code's right there, or you can use the QR code and it brings you right there. I would also ask if anybody has any questions or issues in accessing Mentimeter. I've got the chat open, so I can try and answer those live, or I can do so through the chat screen as well. So I'm going to pause and give everybody a little bit of time to start logging in, and we'll be able to see. I think once we get going, we can see people join. The fun part about these, if nobody's seen this before, is we get to see the answers real time. So keep in mind when you type in, because we have some open-ended questions, that everybody on this call is going to see, or on the webinar rather, is going to see your answers, and they will be publicly accessible as well, because the webinar is being recorded and potentially distributed publicly. So keep your answers on the level. Faith, shall we move on? There we go. Okay. So the first question is open-ended, right? Why are you interested in EV charging infrastructure in North Carolina? Do you have an EV? Are you an EV supplier? Do you want to make sure that your community gets the investment, at least from the federal side and from the state side, to make sure that we're staying competitive? This is a baseline question that we're just really wanting people to be able to get some familiarity with Mentimeter, and also it's a valuable question to know the answers to. Decarbonization, that's a big one. I have an EV. A 5-year EV owner. I was in North Dakota as part of another project last week, and they had an EV tailgate there, and they had a bunch of the newer models. They had a few Cybertrucks and a bunch of Teslas, obviously, the new Hyundai, or rather Kia, the EV9, the big SUV. And it was kind of neat because in a state like that, where it's a very rural state that's the lowest EV adoption, there's still a lot of people that I think are mimicking the same types of thoughts that I'm seeing on screen right now, right? Want to make it a viable choice. They own an EV. They're interested. They want to make sure that the infrastructure is built according to ways that benefit their communities. This is great feedback. Community access needs, perhaps Robbinsville. That's my last name, not Robbinsville, but it seems like someplace I should go. Okay, this is terrific. So we've got 11 questions. In the interest of time, so I'm going to give maybe another minute for some of these responses to roll in, and we'll go to the next one. If you're still writing your response, don't worry. It allows you to carry on with that, and then you can go to the next question basically when you submit your first one. So all the opportunities essentially to respond, then you're going to have, that's not going away. Home, work, public charging. So as we're answering questions, I'm going to continue to kind of talk. I do own an EV myself. I have a Hyundai Ioniq 5, and I actually don't own a home charger. I use the trickle charger that comes with the vehicle that plugs into a 120 volt outlet, and it essentially allows me to top up for the most part if I drive a short amount. But the charging infrastructure at work kind of solves that problem. Like, I don't have to get one installed at my house because I have one at work. And then within a 3-block walk, I've got one, there's a university nearby, a public charger that I use as well. And so it's a good way to think about it in terms of access to charging. If you don't have the ability to actually charge at home, which generally requires access to a driveway or a reserved parking spot, access to power, access to be able to tap that power, it can be a problem. So things like work and public charging, I think, are very key components to a holistic charging system, especially for people that don't have access to at-home charging. It is doable. It does work. So it's something that's important. And I will say that there's been a lot of studies done as well on the national level about the charging behavior of where folks tend to charge. And I think this pretty much matches what is seen nationally, what's expected nationally. So a majority of charging, I think about 80%, depends on where we're at specifically. 80% will happen at home. It's going to be less so in areas that have kind of a higher trend towards multifamily. Public charging, just depends on the location of those and how many people have access to it. Okay, Faith, do you want to move to the next one? So how many miles do you typically drive per day? And this is just a general question, just to help us understand in terms of the types of charging infrastructure that I think is beneficial for communities. If folks are driving over 110 miles, then kind of tilts toward DCFC. If it's a little bit less, level 2 is generally something that we would anticipate most people can be served by. But it's also a way for us to say, for any EV doubters out there, or anybody that's exploring the concept, how much do you actually drive over 110 miles, which is well within the range of most vehicles. And the reason we chose that is because it's round trip. You can drive somewhere and you can drive back. And that's even, that's not the way even the question is phrased. But at the end of the day, we've got 34 responses, and I think right now we've got one that typically drives over 110 miles. So at least for the folks on this call, now it might be self-selecting because there seem to be a lot of people that already drive EVs, but it is helpful to see at least. Okay, let's go to the next one. So what we're asking is a rank for the types of locations that you would like to see more publicly accessible EV charging stations involved. And so this is Faith, help me, I believe this is a ranking activity where you can actually move the ranks up and down. And we're looking at things like central business districts, shopping centers, travel plazas, and those are really long distance travel plazas is the way that I would describe them. I won't say specifically, but oftentimes there are kind of truck fueling stations that serve that ability as well. Gas stations, college campuses, tourism and recreational locations, shopping centers. They all got mixed up, so I'm reading down the list and I can't anymore. Grocery stores is a good one, public government buildings, gas stations. So I'm going to answer a question that always comes up, and that is, why can't we build charging infrastructure on highway rest areas, federally funded highway rest areas? Back during the Eisenhower era, when we were developing our freeways, there was a law that was passed by the federal government that says commercial activities are prohibited on federally funded charging rest areas. And that would mean that while technically possible, NCDOT could put a charger within a rest area, you basically have to give the power away for free. And that is not the way that most charging infrastructure is conducted. So really, for the infrastructure that's going in as part of this program, is not going to go in rest areas. And there's not a whole heck of a lot of states that are trying that because it triggers a lot of kind of federal issues that are difficult to overcome as well. So what I'm seeing here are some pretty excellent trends. Gas stations, they're in areas where people are already traveling by, right? I mean, they kind of correspond to the traveling public's needs. So it does make sense that chargers could and should go there. Shopping centers, places that people generally go, grocery stores, public government buildings, tourism, travel plazas less, central business districts less, and college campuses kind of falling up on the back. This is nice. It's like a straight line up. Alrighty. Okay, so next question is, help us rank the importance of the following kind of design, siting, amenity features of these public EV fast chargers, the fast charging infrastructure. So is it number of ports or charging speed or the ability to pull through the space instead of being a head end or a back end space for larger vehicles or vehicles trailer, access to convenience and amenities like bathrooms, food, things like that, on-site dining, shopping, restrooms, lighting, 24-hour customer service, Wi-Fi, trash and recycling receptacles, and then a weather canopy. Charging speeds, number of ports, oh, customer service is up there. On-site dining. The charging speed is one of those questions that we ask like stakeholder groups often, and a lot of the responses that we get, because NEVI sets the threshold at 150 kilowatts for the DC fast chargers, and obviously has the minimum number of ports at 4. So the question that we tend to ask is like, is it enough ports? Is that a fast enough speed for chargers? You ask auto industry folks and they're like, well, they're not getting slower. Like the vehicles themselves are not getting slower at charging. So, you know, I think most people see it as a pretty important amenity to be able to charge quickly or to have free chargers available when you're pulling in, which corresponds to the number of ports, both charging speed and number of ports. The faster the charging speed, you know, you can potentially get more vehicles through. Greater the number of ports, obviously there's more opportunity for people to charge. Restrooms, lighting, access to convenient on-site dining, shopping. As an aside, my wife took my EV out and drove to her hometown and back, and she had a charge on the way back. And it's, for people not familiar, it's a newer experience, right? I had to take her through like how to use the app, how to hold it up to the charger, how to plug it in. But you know, we've all grown up, I think, in the world of internal combustion and gas, and like we all know how gas stations work. And this is going to be something that people have to learn that don't have EVs right now, and that might be a barrier for implementation. Just the knowledge of how this all works. All right, so we got 35 responses. Let's carry on to the next one. She was successful at charging, by the way. What is your primary concern about charging at a public EV charging station? So lack of public charging infrastructure in your particular area, the charging speed of the time, safety concerns, reliability of stations, the price of electricity, other concerns, or no concerns at all. And speed's kicking up there. Lack of chargers, charging speed, reliability. Yeah, for all the EV drivers, it's not fun when you pull up to a station and it's not working. So I can definitely see that. I don't want to see the results. Price of electricity. Okay, we got 40 on that. Let's go. Okay, so this is where I want everybody to kind of take a step back and really consider. When I say objective, what we mean by that is, what is it that we're trying to solve with the application of EV charging? So when we think about phase 2, again, these objectives can be things like having ubiquitous charging infrastructure throughout the state. It can be to facilitate tourism. It can be make sure that we're getting chargers in rural areas. It can be really focused on equity and Justice 40. It can be to facilitate hurricane evacuation. These are just examples. So really, this is a really key question for us as we shape phase 2. And how do we look at that phase 2 in a way that benefits North Carolina and your communities? access, charging for all to facilitate electrification for all, equity and reliability, advertised locations, chargers in tourist destination areas, and then off major interstates, filling in gaps, building out DCFC in tourist areas along the coast, building a guide to help local government staff navigate. Okay, that's a good one. Buy America chargers. Making chargers available to underserved communities, providing a more robust charging infrastructure to focus on rural communities, environmental justice and equity in historically overburdened areas, equitable and reliable chargers, charging for new and existing multifamily, build chargers where people go, charging in the city, meaningful city savings, gaps burning a functional network, ensure that destination areas have charging infrastructure, charging deserts, build out the level 2 program and ensure that tourists and other charging opportunities are provided. Access to rural areas in Western North Carolina. Community charging, increased penetration in urban areas, affordability and equity. Account for J3400 charging standards. I will say in the NEVI program, it is a requirement that all of the chargers are, so the feds require a CCS1, and the states can actually add additional requirements. And so part of the procurement is that they do have to add, they have to have both. They have to have the NACs for the J3400. They also have to have the CCS1. And so everybody, if there's anybody unaware, there was kind of a, at this point, it's a dead charging standard called CCS1, dead as of like 8 months ago. When the feds started as a requirement, it was kind of the standard outside of Tesla, but Tesla opened up their standard, and SAE has been developing it into an actual standard, which is J3400. And now I think 95% of the vehicles sold by 2025 potentially are from manufacturers that have signed on to that standard. So it is the de facto winner of the charging standard wars. Now CCS1 is the beta of our lives. Okay, DCFC on non-AFC corridors. We'll go to the next question. You're good, Faith. That's fine. So one of the things that the federal government and the state government is really keen to address is how charging infrastructure and how this program can benefit disadvantaged communities. So on the federal side, they call it Justice 40, and the way that program is essentially described as 40% of the benefits of the program should go to Justice 40 communities. And so part of it is understanding how we can think about benefits. And so, that can be in terms of access to chargers. It could be in terms of emissions reductions in underserved areas. It could be workforce development. There's a lot of different ways that we can think about using the program to benefit Justice 40 communities. And this is a question really intended to help us understand how you all perceive this. So how do we think about disadvantaged communities and how they can benefit from the NEVI program? So fix the ownership issue for renters and people living in apartments and condos, yes. Put chargers in areas so they can financially benefit from EV users charging there. Disadvantaged communities may not be able to afford an EV, so sales tax needs to be generated from helping stations to help local underserved communities. Provide chargers and ancillary facilities in underserved communities. Chargers and ancillary facilities. Infrastructure and multifamily, infrastructure support. MUD, enable them to consider electrification. Assume that's multiple unit dwellings. More charging infrastructure for multifamily housing. Access to affordable, reliable charging stations around multifamily. I feel like there's a theme, and it might be multifamily. Job creation and reduced costs for charging. Used EVs should also benefit from the tax incentives for purchasing EVs. Okay, a couple things I did want to mention there's a comment on. So as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, they did renew the the EV purchase credit. So it's $7,000 for the purchase of a new EV, and there's income requirements as part of that. I won't get into that, but they did open that program up to used EVs as well. So if the EV is under $25,000 in purchase price, if it is over 2 years old, There are income limits per household, I believe, that apply to that. But you can essentially get I think it's a $3,500 credit off the cost of the purchase of that EV. And if anybody's read the news, the cost of used EVs has plummeted in the past month or two, 3 months, where you can get a Tesla for $20,000 now. You apply the EV tax credit to that, that's in the ballpark of $17,000. Now, that's still a lot of money, but it is getting better. They're getting more affordable. Access to affordable electric vehicles, reliable charging stations, low census areas such as Graham County, workforce development, chargers at community centers, 13-cent charging. This will be fun for anybody that owns an EV. I was in Ohio and I used the first NEVI station in the state. It was 63 cents a kilowatt hour to use, but it did charge my car at about 240 kilowatts, so it was speedy. Look at non-network level 2 chargers because they're way less expensive. Chargers available where people live and work. Okay, this is good.
Justin, this is Paula. I just want to mention that we already have workforce development going on in community colleges. We are rolling out an EV charger repair class this summer. We have 12 students at Wake County Community College, Wake Tech, taking those classes. And then will be rolled out to other colleges as well.
Yeah, Paula, did you want to talk a little bit more about the program? The gentleman that was with us, Dr. Ballou, I think, from our roundtables, the one that he was kind of making sure everybody was aware of.
Right. They have a $23 million grant that they received several years ago to do clean energy training in community colleges across the state. And they have rolled that out. It also includes internships and apprenticeships, so students can benefit right away from the training. And so far, so good. We've had a lot of success, I believe. There's been some pilot programs that happened even before the grant was awarded. So, and in the area of solar energy. And so I feel like it's really great and it's already rolling out. So if you have students that might be interested in high school or college age or even adult workforce transitioning, that they can do all 3 of those. So the Steps for Growth program out of North Carolina A&T University is a really good opportunity, and contact your local community college for more information as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula. I was blown away when I heard the pitch for the first time. I shouldn't say the pitch, but the overview of the program. It's impressive. It's one of the few states I think that I'm aware of, at least, that's doing something so focused and so intense on workforce development related to EV charging. So it's exciting. Let's hit the next question or the next slide. How should we get communities involved as we plan for phase 2? It's kind of, we're asking for feedback. What's our next step? How does engagement look from the standpoint of the communities around the state that we want to be able to reach and get feedback from? Contacting community leaders? Is it webinars like this? Is it being in person? Is it any number of things? Looking for general feedback is always appreciated. Engage city building code officials and planning boards. That's a good one. They're all good. Electric car and e-bike days where you show the community what the vehicles look like. Yeah, like I said, I saw that in North Dakota and people were excited. People walking up, I didn't think they would be, EV enthusiasts. Ride and drive to give people experience and excitement and exposure. Car dealers should be knowledgeable. That's a big one. Local social media, work with local government leaders, work with RPOs and MPOs, direct contact. Funding available directly to community for EV development. A community leader and a board member. Welcome small businesses. There's an in-person information. Roundtables like phase 1. Extensive public outreach in disadvantaged communities. Community Information Initiative.
As Justin's reading those, I see someone called out Triangle Clean Cities. They are a great resource. North Carolina currently has 3 clean cities, as well as a 4th that is in development, such that we will ultimately have coverage of the entire state. So I do encourage anyone who's on the webinar today, especially if you are in the Triangle, the Metrolina area, which is Charlotte area, or the Asheville area where we have the 3 established clean cities, reach out to them. The 4th one will also be out of the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. They will be covering the triad in the eastern part of the state. So they are wonderful resources. They often are the ones who help promote those ride and drives that also were mentioned during this section. So great resource.
Excellent. So we got 22 responses. I think we've got 1 more left. So the question is, who should we be engaging with? And this is an open-ended question. This is similar to the last one, but we can get more specific in terms of potential people, community leaders, groups specifically.
Names of community leaders would be an acceptable response if you know someone.
We'll add them to the list. EVC providers. Utility companies, community organizations. There's one on there of NC Rural Center. Yeah, one we can look up a little bit. EJ
Yes,
groups.
I believe that I've worked with them on other projects, so I think
Okay.
that might be a really good resource.
Yeah, perfect. Next time we structure this, we can't move around while I'm trying to read them. It becomes a bit difficult, but that's okay. All right. Well, this is the end of our Mentimeter questions. I think from my perspective, at least, like this gives us a lot of really good information to help us start the initial planning for phase 2. And so what I can say is that this will not be the end, right? This is the very beginning that kind of gets us enough information to shape the development, the direction at least of kind of the next phases of engagement and asking questions and kind of building an understanding of what a program could look like for phase 2. So I definitely appreciate it. I think the next part we have in the slides is, yes, Tanya.
Yes, thank you. Well, that was good, Justin. I think one of the comments were you are killing it. Y'all all killing it. You're giving great information, and I recognize many of those organizations, and the NC Rural Center and several others are great organizations to work with. So continue to reach out and send us information of key partners. That's really an important aspect of making sure that we have broad information to the industry. So that's a good segue into my part of the presentation. So good afternoon. My name is Tanya Smith, and I serve as the director for the NCDOT, North Carolina Department of Transportation, Office of Civil Rights. And I'm glad to be with you all here today. Next slide. So telling you a little bit about what our office does. So NCDOT Civil Rights Office is an area where we ensure that we're providing equal access to customers and employees participating in transportation programs that receive either federal and or state funding. We're here to inform our small minority businesses about all the opportunities, and in particular, this grand opportunity to engage in such a new and innovative space, the electric vehicle charging stations that will be built out throughout North Carolina for phase 1 and now for phase 2. Access to clean energy jobs and workforce development is key part of the North Carolina NEVI program, but also is creating opportunities for disadvantaged communities to participate and have access to these jobs. The Office of Civil Rights will lead North Carolina's NEVI program elements related to women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, disadvantaged business enterprises. So we have a federal and state program, and we'll make sure that we apply equity throughout the project to ensure that we identify all of our stakeholders and to really maximize our presence and create those equitable outcomes. So it's really important. I hear from you, our team hears from you, so we know where to look and any blind spots that we have. But I also love the phase 2 of this is that we can be more creative in our solution mapping. Next slide. So some of the Office of Civil Rights Services, NEVI is aligned with guidance outlined in the Justice 40 initiative that came out of USDOT and as well as the USDOT Equity Action Plan to create benefits for the community. Heather talked to you about opportunities for some of the larger businesses, but much of the thrust of what OCR will be doing will be making sure that our small businesses can capitalize on these opportunities. This includes business development and workforce development. So part of our implementation strategy is that we're hosting webinars such as today, listening sessions, technical assistance will be provided throughout the project lifecycle. We'll provide supportive services to businesses that need guidance. And a great thing about our supportive services structure is that we work with both sides of the aisle. So the larger firms and our small firms as well. But we help bridge the relationship to ensure the project, the program is really being realized. We're here to create sustainable strategies and outcomes for the entire transportation sector. So we'll be here to help guide along the way. That's why it's really important that you stay connected to the Office of Civil Rights, so our programs and services. As part of the Mentimeter, I saw there were some providers that offer policy on EV, and there were some providers, and I also saw that many of the responses were focused on accessible chargers and expanding sustainable transportation opportunities. Lots of owners, and there was identified areas and opportunities for rural areas, but most of the drive time was less than 110 miles. And I also saw that most visit shopping areas and travel location. It was interesting that work was not amongst those top areas, but I'm assuming that work was in the mix of that. But we'll be here to help create an equitable strategy and a platform for our small businesses to participate, whether it be on the weather canopies or providing concessions, goods and services along the way. Next slide. So some things that we really think that small business should be aware of, and that is to have a business site plan considerations. We have analyzed and talked to different businesses about you know, what are some blind spots? What are some things that people should be looking out for, right? We've hosted different roundtables and collected Q&As to help navigate this territory. We know that it can be challenging and overwhelming for some businesses, but we hosted webinars with the State Energy Office and the NC Rural Center, which have been great, and they've yielded some wonderful results. And from this, we built out our database with firms matched to different types of work that we have available. But part of the listening sessions is that we've gotten involved. We did some hands-on with some group think and group conversations to really analyze what are the technical assistance and support that might be needed to help lead to success in this area. So what we've learned has been very valuable of how you can participate. But you know, as you're starting to think about your business plan, maybe think about electricity cost analysis, how the site will be utilized, profit payback period, reimbursement schedules, right? Part of the match for this is 20% match to federal funds. How about those site amenities and opportunities for additional sales of food and merchandise while charging? Right? That's all important, not only for the driver, but also for the surrounding community. What about operations and maintenance, replacement costs, the insurance costs? You know, we're looking at weatherization of the sites and how, you know, flooding will impact our sites. Since most of you have mentioned that you like to travel with your vehicle. So the level 2 is more the, you know, local charging, as opposed to phase 1 is more interstate charging. But all of that have operations and maintenance associated. What about access to capital and building partnerships? When we look at the workforce development part of this, we know that we'll need some on-site support. We'll need some on-call support. There will also be some remote support. So part of the strategy is how will you be able to maintain the operations of the site with all different scenarios? If it's an issue with payments, if it's a downtime issue, if it's a language access issue, right? These are all things that we want you to consider as part of your business plan. But these are conversations that the Office of Civil Rights can assist you in developing out these ideas. And part of that is helping to further along the matchmaking. If you haven't visited our NEVI website, there's a matchmaking database listed on our website to help match our EV service providers, our utility providers, and our small business owners. Next slide. So to make sure we're meeting your goals, we'll be evaluating our program metrics regularly. I can share with you some of those best practices on an ongoing basis, knowing that some of these we're learning as we go. This is a new industry, a new mode of transportation in a way. I will conclude by telling you that the information I'm sharing today is always going to be fluid. So still you have to exercise your business expertise and savvy, but we're here to assist you along the way. I can't say that enough. We're here to assist you along the way. I want to encourage all of you who are joining here today to reach out to our office, the Office of Civil Rights, to help you navigate this space. If you have any questions, we can help find answers for you. With that being said, I conclude my presentation and thank you again for joining. I will yield back to the remaining project team members.
Thank you, Tanya, for that presentation on the services the Office of Civil Rights can provide for people who are interested in the program. We are pretty much at the end of the presentation. We are at the question and answer. We've only received one question thus far, but you certainly have time to still put a question in there if there is any. The only question we have currently is when we had the question about where you charge, we should have had it multiple choice. as I was looking at the Mentimeter myself, I was like, you know what, we should have had that multiple choice, because we do recognize that it showed that majority of charging is done at home, but most people who have an electric vehicle are going to charge everywhere. They're going to charge at home, you know, if it's trickle charge, like what Justin says, because it didn't have home charging, whether it's public charging because you are traveling or there's one close to where you work, or if there is one at your work. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities when it comes to charging. We do have one question in there about sourcing of hardware and software partners. Tanya did mention that we do have a networking database. When it comes to the RFP that is currently out, or actually all of the RFPs that we will be doing, is we will not be sourcing that. It will be through the application process. So whoever is applying for the location based on the RFP, they would need to determine the hardware and software that they were going to utilize, and assuming that it meets the NEVI standards. So there are standards that are very clearly defined. Tanya again also mentioned our website. Our website contains a lot of those requirements for both hardware that's very clearly defined with the NEVI requirements, as well as software. There is a data reporting requirement, and so there will be obviously some software that needs to be installed to collect that information.
And Heather, if I can add, as part of the information that we are providing on our website, this is an attempt for us to gather the available information that we're getting from the industry. However, because it's fluid and dynamic, it's changing. So it's important not just to plug into our website to gather and collect information, but to actually stay connected to our project team. And to stay connected early and ongoing. When the advertisements and solicitations go out, at that point, the selection team or anyone at NCDOT cannot answer specific questions about solicitation. So it's important for us to hear your questions now during our listening sessions, our webinars, prior to that process. That's so important. So we're here for you as a team to answer any questions. Please don't be shy. We always hear questions after the fact. So we really want to hear your questions today. And if you want to email or get in touch with us, that's great as well. But maybe the question that you have, somebody else may have the same question. So please share today if you're able to.
Thanks, Tanya. The next question was can't speak today, was with regards to the cost of planning and installing charging stations. Reach out to us. We have some information. Obviously, when it comes to the RFP, we are in the evaluation process. We can't share or divulge that information that we've received. However, we do have other projects that we've worked on through either the Division of Air Quality did through the Volkswagen settlement. So we have some costs for installing and planning stations. We are also installing some stations ourselves. So we have some information, but it's going to be very variable depending on your access. If you're talking about DC fast charging, your access to three-phase power, how close it is to. There's a lot of the need for transformers. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to cost estimations. But we can certainly give you some information. The slide which Justin shared earlier kind of gives you a range of costs, so you can kind of get an idea at least of magnitude when it comes to installing this infrastructure. One person asked for the contact for the presenters. When we send out the link to the presentation recording, we will make sure that we put in there our contact information. However, if you go to the NEVI website, there is a contact us button that comes to both Paul and I have access to that. So if you have any questions about anything, that's certainly your first stop, or should be your first stop when you have questions, because we will be posting there information on future RFPs, any plan updates like Paula indicated, that's due in September, that will be posted up there once it's been approved by FHWA. So it's really our one-stop resource location. We try to put as much information up there as we can. So the next one is, does North Carolina plan to go above NEVI minimum requirements for applicants to report for community charging partners? So with the current RFP, you know, there's obviously a charging requirement for reporting number of utilization and things of that nature. We will be using EV chart, which is the tool that is being developed by the federal partners. So at this point, we do not have any plans to do more than what is required by the federal partners. This is, I think, asking for, oh, sorry. Blue Ridge Parkway, yeah, that would be a good thing. And I will say that, you know, we are in discussions with, you know, our Western Clean Cities partners, as well as those, you know, MPOs, RPOs in that area. The utilization of EV charging in the mountains is much different than it is in the Piedmont or the coastal regions, just because topography makes it a little more challenging. But yes, we would certainly, that would be a good location to have along the Blue Ridge Parkway. The information was provide a list of firms, entities that submitted RFPs for round one. Can't at this point, but certainly that is public information and will be provided, you know, once we have selected those recipients. This is in regards to new DC level 2 charging. So there is technology when it comes to charging vehicles is ever evolving. That is one of the things that my office does also keep up with, is, you know, changing technologies. That option, you know, certainly could be explored when we get to the phase 2 infrastructure investment. Right now, everything is focused on the first phase, which is the NEVI compliant, and that's only DC fast charge level 3, not DC level 2. So I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat pod. To Tanya's point, we still have a couple minutes. I'm not going to keep you guys all on the line if there aren't any questions. However, again, we will send out the link to the presentation once it's posted with our contact information. We will also put in there a link to the NEVI website, where if you have any questions at any time, you can certainly feel free to reach out to us. Just as a reminder, you know, this is just the first of many opportunities. You know, one of the questions that we asked during the Mentimeter was, you know, how should we engage? The idea of round tables or road shows like we did with phase 1 is very likely going to occur for phase 2. But because the focus is more on community engagement, we're also looking at, you know, opportunities to speak on a much more personal level. So if you have ideas of entities or areas in your communities that really can target in on those communities that maybe are harder to engage with historically, we would welcome any information or feedback on that as well, because that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make sure that certainly for you know, phase 2, that we put a lot of thought and consideration into the issue of equity and making sure that we're planning for what the community needs, not what some engineer in Raleigh thinks is best, because we want to make sure that it's what you guys all think.
And all stakeholders are a stakeholder. So I saw in the Menti we had some board members and community leaders, utility providers, and so we are open to come to your organization, NC Rule Center, and the SW board member that was there. We can come to your organization and speak to our audience and sort of inform the informants of what we have available. So when you talk to your membership base or your constituents, they have this information, as well as coming to larger businesses that work with smaller businesses. If you have a network, we can speak to the network as well about the opportunities to audiences that traditionally don't receive the information in our diverse communities across the state. If there's any requests for language access, we can also provide any type of disability services, interpretation. We have some languages available to be able to interpret to different audiences. So we're here to provide that resource as well through our office and the project team.
Thanks, Tanya. I actually am seeing one question for you, Tanya. It was, you had mentioned, I guess, that you were surprised that there was not charging at work, was not a high priority. And then it's referring to Brunswick County, comprised mainly of retired people who are not in the workforce. So I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add with that. I mean, I would say that charging at work, it's certainly not a priority of the NEVI program holistically. I mean, when we get into phase 2, it's certainly something we can consider. What Justin kind of touched upon earlier is that most people do still charge at home. So the majority of the charging is done at home. Probably ancillary to that, it would be at work. And then your third option would be public charging. But that doesn't mean that it's not a priority. It's just, where it is. So I didn't know if you had anything to add to that, Tanya, since it was directed to you.
That was great information. And that's, as we go across our rural counties and across our state in general, we're identifying the different needs so we can build up an infrastructure program that suits the needs of every county. And so as we get into areas of high retirement, more agriculture areas, we really want to hear from you. So definitely Brunswick County, if you can share more information about your constituent base in your geographic area that can help us build infrastructure that works for your area. Those are the types of information that we need to know. But we really want to ensure that our services provide for everyday traveling public. So whether it be to medical facilities and shopping centers, grocery stores, definitely the critical need areas, we want to make sure that the mapping and creative solutions fit the needs of everyone. So we would love to hear from you more about engagement opportunities and some ideas from you so that we can make sure that we don't build one model that fits all, but a model that fits for everyone.
Right. That's kind of that should be, we should keep replaying that over and over again, because that's the purpose of the reason why we understand that phase 2 engagement is going to take as long as it has, is because it's very, very clear cut what phase 1 is intended to do and what we have to meet those requirements. Phase 2 really gives us a lot of latitude to build what is needed in the community rather than something prescriptive that may not fit for your area.
And to go back very quickly to the, this is Paula, to go back very quickly to the workplace charging, I think a lot of that happened to create incentives for adoption and to work on sustainability goals for individual companies. So to the extent that this is a public taxpayer funded program, I'm not sure that we could support some of those goals with that program.
Unless they were open to the public,
Right.
at all times.
Right.
So and that's a good point, Paula. So one of the things to consider when you start thinking about, phase 2 engagement or phase 2 build out, workplace charging is very important. but one of the requirements of the NEVI program is that it is publicly accessible. So if it was on a, if it was charging that was at your place of business, it has to be open to anyone who wants to be able to charge there, whether they work at that location or not. So that is one of the caveats of the program.
And that would be something we took comments on as to whether it had to be open to the public 24/7. Could it be used at night for fleet charging? How would that work? How is, what is the equity behind that? So those are kinds of considerations we need to think about for this community charging program that you all should voice your opinion on.
And I am not seeing any additional questions. We've been talking amongst ourselves. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. I know it's hard to carve out an hour and a half of your day, especially in the afternoon, although if you're in North Carolina, maybe you're avoiding the oppressive heat that is outside. So hopefully you're staying cool. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you again for your time. Look for us reaching out to you again in the future for future engagement opportunities. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have any ideas of how you would like us to engage with your community, whether you have a festival or whether you have a town council meeting or what it might be. We can provide information or support to you for that as well. So again, my name is Heather Hildebrand. Thank you for your opportunity. With me was Justin, Paula, and Tanya. And thanks for Faith for running the show. And we will talk to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Have a great day.